Perhaps you've spent your whole life trying to improve yourself, trying to be better, to be proper, to hide the parts of you that you fear others might see. But what if the very parts you've buried actually hold the key to self-love and inner peace? Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." For the next hour, this will not simply be something you listen to before falling asleep. It will be a journey inward, a return to yourself, a meeting with your shadow, and ultimately, an embrace of it. You will be guided to loosen the grip of self-judgment, to stop fighting yourself, and to begin healing the forgotten parts of your soul, not through force, but through acceptance, not through control, but through understanding. Prepare to meet yourself again, not the perfect version, but the real one, the deep, raw, and profoundly beautiful self within. We begin. Part 1. What is the shadow? When people mention the shadow, most immediately think of bad traits, selfishness, laziness, greed, anger, jealousy. But that understanding is only the surface, and in fact, a deeply misleading one. In Carl Jung's psychology, the shadow is not the evil part of a person, but the part that we have rejected, suppressed, denied, and pushed down into the unconscious. It includes fears we don't dare to acknowledge, desires we once felt were wrong, feelings we were taught we shouldn't have, the most authentic parts of ourselves we once felt ashamed of. In psychology and religion, Jung wrote a very important sentence: "The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality." The shadow is not a set of bad traits to fix, but an inner moral challenge that forces the ego to face itself. A child who was scolded for expressing anger will learn to suppress anger, and that anger becomes part of the shadow. A child who was mocked for crying easily will learn to swallow tears, and that sensitivity goes into the shadow. A child who was shamed for expressing needs will learn to suppress wanting, and the longing gets pushed into the shadow. The shadow does not contain only bad traits. It holds the part that wanted to be acknowledged, the part that wanted to be loved, the part that wanted to be seen, the part that wanted to be natural and authentic. And here we find a profound paradox. Some parts of us were pushed into the shadow, not because they were bad, but because they were wounded. Jung wrote in Ion, "It is quite within the bounds of possibility for a man to recognize the relative evil of his nature, but it is a rare and shattering experience for him to gaze into the face of absolute evil. Here, evil is not a demon, but the true part of ourselves that we are afraid to look at. We do not hate the shadow, we fear it, because if we look at it, we must face the most painful question. Am I really the good person I think I am? And the answer might be, there were moments when I was selfish. There were moments when I was weak. There were moments when I was full of desire. There were moments when I was wounded. There were moments when I desperately wanted to be loved, and Jung believed only when we have the courage to look at these truths does real psychological growth begin. In memories, dreams, reflections, he wrote, "I would rather be whole than good." This is a powerful and liberating declaration. Society teaches us to be good, obedient, polite, agreeable, not bothersome, not demanding. But the soul, the inner essence, does not want good. It wants whole. It wants wholeness. A human being does not become free by being pleasant. A human being becomes free by being authentic. The shadow holds the parts of ourselves that we have pushed down, blocked, dismissed, not dared to face. And therefore, Jung said that psychological development is not a process of adding something new, but a process of removing what we have denied within ourselves. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Jung, it is the journey of liberating the forgotten parts. Now imagine this. There is a person who harshly judges ambitious people. Jung would not ask, "What do you think about ambition?" He would ask, "What ambition in yourself are you rejecting?" Another person criticizes others for being too sensitive. Jung would not ask, "Do you dislike sensitivity in others?" He would ask, "Were you once ashamed of allowing yourself to be vulnerable?" When we feel discomfort toward someone, sometimes we are not truly seeing them. We are seeing ourselves reflected in them. Jung described this phenomenon with the concept of projection, projecting content of our shadow onto others. And here is an important statement. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. The shadow is not something we must destroy, not something we must repress, not an enemy to defeat. The shadow is the inner child who was once silenced when it wanted to speak. It is the part of the heart once deemed weak. It is the anger that was once a cry for justice. It is the longing once labeled selfish. The shadow is the child who was once lonely and now waits for us to come back. Hold its hand and say, "I see you. I hear you. I will not abandon you again." When we do that, something miraculous happens. Anger transforms into healthy boundaries. Need transforms into the ability to love oneself. Sensitivity transforms into subtle intuition. Desire transforms into life force motivation. The shadow is not a collection of bad traits. The shadow is potential that has not yet been integrated. And when we reconcile with it, we become the most authentic version of ourselves, not the version society wants us to be. And once we begin to understand that the shadow is not the bad part, but the forgotten part, the next question arises. Why did we have to hide these parts in the first place? If they were not inherently bad, if they were authentic parts of us, why did we push them into the dark. This brings us back to the deep psychological origin, the defense mechanisms of the psyche, and the human fear of rejection. Part 2. Why do we hide parts of ourselves? Human beings do not hide parts of themselves out of malice or stubbornness. We hide them out of self-protection. The psyche does not act foolishly. It acts according to the logic of survival. From early childhood, we learn how to adapt to the world. We look at our parents, our teachers, our community, our cultural norms, and form a deep unconscious conclusion. Which parts of me will be loved and which parts will get me rejected? A child cannot survive if abandoned. A child cannot grow if completely rejected. And so, when a part of us is deemed unacceptable, too sensitive, too dreamy, too ambitious, too intense, too weak, too different, we do not eliminate this part. We hide it to ensure social survival. Carl Jung made this clear in Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious. The psyche instinctively uses every possible means to protect the individual. The shadow, therefore, is not the discarded part, but the part preserved to maintain inner safety. 1. The defense mechanisms of the psyche. Self-preservation through suppression. When we are judged, mocked, shamed, or belittled, the mind learns to suppress. It learns to push a portion of emotional life into the deep layers of the unconscious, like pressing a submerged object beneath water. The more we push it down, the less it appears on the surface. Freud called this repression. Jung carried the theory further, showing that repression is not just suppression, but a splitting of the self into two entities. The persona, the social mask, the shadow, the authentic self pushed behind it. In 2 essays on analytical psychology, Jung wrote, "The persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself and others think one is." We build a persona, a social self, to fit expectations. But the authentic self, the part that does not fit, is pushed into the shadow. This is a psychological strategy for surviving in society. 2. The fear of rejection, the terror of social abandonment. We do not merely fear criticism, we fear not belonging. Humans are biologically social beings. Isolation is a form of psychological death. A child understands this instinctively, without any theory. If I show weakness, I am looked down upon. If I show anger, I am punished. If I show need for love, I am seen as annoying. So what does the child do? It does not erase these feelings. It trades them for acceptance. Jung wrote in Symbols of Transformation, "We all need someone to love us, because we all need to belong. To belong, we learn to sacrifice authenticity." 3. The fear of being fundamentally flawed. There is a deeper fear than being criticized. It is the fear that something inside us is truly wrong. If I am ambitious, does that mean I am a bad person? If I feel envy, does that mean I am inferior? If I am weak, am I worthless? If I want to be loved, am I emotionally needy? Jung pointed out in The Undiscovered Self, the world will ask you who you are, and if you do not know, the world will tell you. When we are not strong enough to define ourselves, we let society define us, and society often defines humans by norms, not by inner truth. 4. The fear of being seen as weak, vulnerability as danger. Vulnerability is an open doorway to pain. If we expose the wound, others may press on it. So we learn to hide our tears, hide our sorrow, hide our longing, hide our wish to be loved, not because we no longer feel these things, but because we refuse to bear one more wound. Jung wrote in Modern Man, In Search of a Soul, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. We avoid looking into the shadow because we know unconsciously that when that door is opened, pain will walk in alongside awareness. 5. Emotional numbing, the freezing mechanism. We do not simply hide the shadow. We learn to stop feeling it. We learn to live as though we are not angry, not weak, not desiring, not afraid, not in need of love. But that is only an emotional mask. The hidden part does not disappear. It merely waits for the day we feel safe enough to step into the light. And here is the fascinating truth. No matter how tightly we attempt to hide the shadow, it still reveals itself through subtle signs in everyday life. The shadow does not stay silent in the dark. It tries to speak to us through emotions, reactions, discomfort, judgments, and many other forms of expression. And that brings us to the next part, Part 3. The signals of the shadow in everyday life. Discomfort toward the behavior of others, the traits we refuse in ourselves. This is one of the subtlest mechanisms of the shadow. What we dislike in others is often what we do not allow ourselves to be. If we feel irritated when someone demands, expresses emotions, shows their needs, becomes angry, asserts their rights, cries, reveals their wounds, then perhaps it's not because those actions are wrong, but because we were once taught that we ourselves were not allowed to do the same. There is a quiet paradox here. We are not bothered by what we are indifferent to. We are bothered by what touches the suppressed part inside us. For example, if we were never shamed for crying, we would not feel discomfort seeing someone else cry. If we were never criticized for being too ambitious, we would not get irritated when others pursue ambition. If we were never scolded for expressing needs, we would not feel uneasy when others make demands. The shadow within us stirs when it sees the shadow in others. The projection mechanism, throwing our own content onto others, in archetypes and the collective unconscious. Jung explained, projection is one of the commonest psychic phenomena. Projection occurs when we fail to recognize an emotion within ourselves and unconsciously fling it onto another person. Examples: we do not realize we are envious, so we see someone and find them detestable. We do not realize we fear failure, so we call someone else cowardly. We do not acknowledge our need to be loved, so we criticize someone as clingy. And in that criticism, the unconscious is screaming, I am in pain, but I do not know that I am in pain. The shadow as a reversed mirror. The most difficult thing about the shadow is it does not speak in words. It does not appear as a thought. It manifests as a reaction. Other people become mirrors, reflecting the parts of ourselves we have rejected. Carl Jung said what may be the key to this entire journey: who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes, collected works. Volume 10. When we look outward, we see the faults of others. When we look inward, we see the unintegrated parts of ourselves. And most importantly, recognizing the shadow is not about feeling ashamed, but about beginning a process of healing. We are not meant to ask, how do I eliminate the shadow? But rather, what is my shadow trying to tell me? And this naturally brings us to the next part, the most profound and transformative one. Part 4. The silent mechanisms of the shadow at work. The shadow does not scream, it whispers. Yet those whispers have shaped how we love, how we work, how we choose partners, how we treat ourselves. The 4 strongest mechanisms operating in the unconscious are self-sabotage, projection, unconscious bias, avoidance patterns. Each mechanism is a psychological strategy originally formed to protect us, but gradually becoming a barrier that restricts our life. 1. Self-sabotage, destroying ourselves from within. This is the most ruthless manifestation of the shadow. We think we want success, happiness, love, advancement. But at a deeper level, there is a part of us that believes I don't deserve it, and that part will destroy everything before we can reach the result. Examples: when success is near, we procrastinate. When good opportunities arise, we avoid. When someone loves us sincerely, we doubt. When things are going well, we don't trust it. In psychology and alchemy, Jung pointed out, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Self-sabotage is not bad luck, not destiny. It is the shadow steering the wheel of our life while we believe we are in control. Self-sabotage often comes from unconscious beliefs, such as, I am not good enough, I don't deserve love, I will disappoint everyone. If I fail publicly, the pain will be unbearable. So we eject ourselves from happiness before life has a chance to do it. 2. Projection, throwing our inner content onto others. We touched on projection earlier, but now we go deeper. Projection occurs when there is a part of ourselves that we cannot face, so we attach it onto someone else. Jung wrote clearly in Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious Projection makes the whole world a replica of our own unknown face, meaning we do not see the world as it is. We see a reflection of our inner state. Examples: the insecure person sees arrogance everywhere. The abandonment-wounded person sees everyone as untrustworthy. The person who rejects their own desire criticizes others as too driven. Projection turns the world into a mirror of the shadow. And the painful truth is, we don't know that we are seeing the world through the lens of our wounds. We think we are seeing truth, but in fact, we are seeing a replica of our injury. 3. Unconscious bias. This is the mechanism by which the shadow shapes our thinking without asking for our permission. Unconscious bias is not a conscious belief, such as I believe X. It is a background belief, deep unchecked, like people like me are trustworthy. People different from me are dangerous. Love is risky. Success always comes with a price. If I express emotions, I will be exploited. In The Undiscovered Self, Jung wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." Unconscious bias is like a tinted filter over our perception. We believe we are being rational, but in truth we are acting from unhealed wounds. Examples. Someone who was once betrayed carries the bias. Anyone can betray me. Someone who was once belittled carries the bias. Life always pushes me down. Someone who was once rejected carries the bias. Love is not for me. The shadow whispers these beliefs, and we live by them as if they were truth. 4. Avoidance patterns. This is where the shadow shows its influence most clearly in our behavior. We avoid facing emotions, conflict, honest communication, commitment, opportunity, intimacy, exposing our true selves. People with avoidance tendencies often say, "It's fine, it doesn't matter. I'm okay. I don't need to talk about it. I don't need anyone. I'll just let it pass." But deep inside, that avoidance is not calmness. It is defense. Jung wrote in Modern Man, "In Search of a Soul," neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. Avoidance is a strategy to dodge true pain. Instead of feeling, we avoid emotion. Instead of speaking truth, we stay silent. Instead of confronting reality, we step back. In the short term, avoidance spares us pain. In the long term, avoidance turns the pain into destiny. When these mechanisms operate in the dark of the unconscious, they shape how we react to the world without us ever knowing it. But here is the miracle. The shadow not only causes pain, it sends signals asking to be freed. And sometimes those signals appear as strange emotional responses, unusual internal pauses, moments where the rational mind has no explanation. And that is exactly what leads us to the next part. Part 5. The pain that is hidden is the pain that was never acknowledged. Carl Jung once said in the practice of psychotherapy, "One does not heal by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. We do not heal by painting a coat of artificial positivity over the wound. We heal by looking directly into the inner darkness where parts of us were hidden, not because they were bad, but because they were painful." Many parts of the shadow were once extremely fragile and were rejected. A part that wanted to be loved, but was seen as weak. A part that wanted to express itself, but was seen as bothersome. A part that dared to dream, but was seen as unrealistic. A part that felt anger, but was seen as insolent. A part that cried, but was taught, "Don't cry, be strong." And the inner child learned one rule: if you show this part, you will be hurt. So it did the most logical thing for survival. It hid that part away. The pain that was never witnessed, so it remains frozen in the dark. Emotions that are not acknowledged do not disappear. They remain preserved in a frozen state, waiting for someone to see them. Jung wrote, in Symbols of Transformation, there can be no transforming of darkness into light, and of apathy into movement without emotion. An emotion that has been locked away is not a dead emotion. It is a suppressed, living emotion. And the greatest tragedy is we think we have grown up and are no longer hurt. But in truth, we have simply learned how not to look at the hurt. 2. Many parts of the shadow were once wounded, shamed parts. Look back and ask, was there a part of you that was dismissed by adults? Was there a part that was mocked by society? Was there a part someone touched and hurt? Was there a part that was rejected when it appeared? For example, if a child was scolded for being angry, they learned to suppress anger. If a child was punished for demanding, they learned to silence their needs. If a child was rejected for showing vulnerability, they learned to hide their softness. If a child was shamed for dreaming, they learned to shrink themselves. The shadow is not the toxic part of us. It is the wounded part that has not been loved enough. 3. We do not hate those parts, we are protecting them. Many people say, I hate my weakness. I hate my sensitivity. I hate my jealousy. I hate my fear. But the truth is often not hatred. The truth is, we are protecting those parts from being hurt again. Those parts were once insulted, trampled, dismissed. So we shield them with hardness, with silence, with avoidance. But deep inside, those parts are whispering, please don't abandon me again. Please don't push me back into the dark. Please don't call me wrong anymore. See me, hear me. 4. When the pain is acknowledged, it begins to melt. A miracle occurs when we allow ourselves to say, yes, I was hurt. Yes, I felt abandoned. Yes, I was afraid I wasn't good enough. Yes, I wanted to be loved more, because then the pain no longer needs to wear armor. Carl Jung said, in Modern Man, In Search of a Soul, what we resist persists. What we fight clings to us. What we avoid surfaces continuously. What we refuse to see continues to control us. But when we look directly at the pain and name it, it begins to dissolve, to transform. 5. Accepting the pain is the first step toward becoming whole. Jung wrote something deeply important in Memories. dreams, reflections. I would rather be whole than good. Society wants us to be good. Family wants us to be good. School wants us to be good. Culture wants us to be good. But the soul, our inner essence, wants us to be whole, to be complete, to be allowed to exist with all parts of ourselves. What is needed is not to become painless. What is needed is to let the pain be seen, be validated, be acknowledged. Because once it is acknowledged, it no longer needs to hide. And when we have the courage to look at the pain that was never acknowledged, we step into the most important phase, learning how to speak with the forgotten part. No more running, no more hiding, no more pretending to be strong. We begin to do the thing that once felt impossible, to look directly at the part of ourselves we do not want to see. That is the content of the next section, a section of inner practice. Part 6, the practice of facing the part of yourself you don't want to see. Many people believe that facing the shadow is an intense act of force, like stepping onto a psychological battlefield. But on the contrary, this is the gentlest act the psyche requires. Jung wrote in The Practice of Psychotherapy, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. This is not a call to fight. This is a call to receive. 1. Guided introspection. Returning inward through gentle guidance. Imagine you are sitting in a quiet room with no noise, no external attention. You begin turning your gaze away from the outer world and redirect it toward the inner world. Jung said in Collected Works, Volume 10, who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. Guided introspection is not an attempt to fix yourself. It is a practice of listening to yourself. A simple yet profound practice is to ask, what emotion is present within me right now? Where did this emotion come from? Does it want acknowledgement or simply to be heard? What is it trying to protect me from? This is the process of listening to the shadow as an old friend, not as an enemy to eliminate. 2. Inner dialogue, leaning toward the forgotten part. Most of the time, we engage in internal monologue. I must be strong. I must not show weakness. I must get better. I must be fine. But inner dialogue is something entirely different. It sounds like saying to yourself, I hear you. I understand why you're afraid. I see that you're in pain. You don't need to hide anymore. In memories, dreams, reflections, Jung said, we need to be able to talk to the inner figures of our psyche. True maturity is not the ability to conceal emotions. True maturity is the ability to speak with them. For example, if there is an angry part inside you, say to it, what are you trying to protect yourself from? If there is a part afraid of abandonment, I understand your fear. You're not alone anymore. If there is a part that feels not good enough, you were once judged, but now you are allowed to exist as you are. This is how the shadow melts, not by force, but by being heard. 3. accepting raw emotion without judgment. This is the hardest step and also the most liberating. Because we are so used to judging ourselves. I shouldn't feel jealous. I shouldn't be weak. I shouldn't be afraid. I shouldn't be sad. I shouldn't hurt over something small. But emotions are not moral. Emotions are inner truth. In modern man, in search of a soul. Jung said, feelings are facts, not facts of the physical world, but facts of the inner world. A person might say, I shouldn't be hurt by this. But if we hurt, then it is true. If we fear, then it is true. If we feel inadequate, then it is true. Not true in an objective sense, but true in the psychological map of the self. Therefore, the practice is not to fix emotion, but to acknowledge it, gentle practice. A simple and effective exercise. Place your hand on your chest or on your heart area and speak a simple but powerful sentence. I allow this emotion to exist. It's okay for me to feel this. I don't need to be right. I don't need to be strong. I don't need to be perfect in this moment. This is the opposite of repression. This is integration. For the result of facing the part you don't want to see. At first, there will be pain, but it is the pain of removing the bandage, not the pain of adding a new wound. You will feel softer, more breathable, less tense, less performative, less judgmental of others, less judgmental of yourself. And something strange arises. A very quiet peace emerges, not the peace of control, but the peace of something inside finally being seen. When we learn how to face the part of ourselves we don't want to see with gentle guidance, inner dialogue, and the acceptance of raw emotion without judgment, we prepare for the deepest transition in the shadow journey, liberating the shadow from its moral prison. Because by now, we begin to see that the parts we buried were not sins, but unopened potentials. Part 7, Liberating the Shadow from the Moral Prison. Society has unconsciously taught us that humans have a good part and a bad part. Family, culture, religion, community, all have built a value system we must adhere to in order to be accepted. In that process, we learn that anger is bad, jealousy is bad, ambition is bad, sadness is bad, expressing needs is bad, wanting to be loved is bad, craving recognition is bad. And so we imprison those parts within the shadow, not because they were truly bad, but because they were not allowed to exist under collective moral standards. 1. The shadow is not bad. It is misunderstood. Carl Jung said something immensely important in Ion. The shadow is merely somewhat inferior, primitive, unadapted, and awkward, not wholly bad, not wholly bad, not entirely evil, The shadow is not the demon within us. It is the part that is still clumsy, still incomplete, still unguided, still unseen. Like a child who has not yet been taught how to walk, how to speak. This changes everything. The shadow is not something to suppress. It is something to educate, to mature, to integrate. 2. The shadow is unintegrated raw material in the archetypes and the collective unconscious. Jung wrote, "The shadow contains those qualities of the ego which could be developed, but which are neglected." The shadow contains qualities we could develop, but have neglected. Examples: anger can become assertiveness, healthy boundary making. Ambition can become creative drive. Sensitivity can become intuition. The need to be loved can become self-love. Jealousy can become clarity about what we truly desire. The shadow is raw psychological material. Unprocessed, it appears negative. Integrated, it becomes power. Like nuclear energy, in a chaotic state, dangerous. Transformed infinite energy. The shadow is our unbloomed self. 3. The shadow is locked potential. In the practice of psychotherapy, Jung said, "In the shadow lies the possibility of renewal." The shadow is the soul's capacity for resurrection. It is the birthplace of new capacities. It is the doorway to versions of ourselves we have never lived. When we suppress emotion, we close the door to authentic communication. When we suppress ambition, we close the door to self-creation. When we suppress sensitivity, we close the door to deep connection. When we suppress anger, we close the door to setting boundaries and self-protection. Nothing in the shadow is meaningless. Even the parts we least want to face have psychological purpose. The moral prison and how it forms. We have built a prison without bars, a prison without guards, a prison we lock ourselves into. With sentences like, "I must not feel this," "I must be strong," "I should not want that," "I should know my place," "I must not compare," "I should not be angry." We create moral laws not to become better, but to become more acceptable. But there is a beautiful truth. The soul does not care about being acceptable. The soul cares about being authentic. Liberating the shadow is the greatest act of self-love, Carl Jung wrote in Memories, Dreams, Reflections. The acceptance of oneself is the essence of the whole moral problem and the epitome of a whole outlook on life. Accepting oneself is not weakness. Accepting oneself is courage. The courage to say, "I have parts that are not perfect. I have parts that are still naive. I have parts that have been hurt. I have parts that want to be loved. And all of these deserve to exist." Why does liberating the shadow bring inner peace? Because fighting the shadow is war. Integrating the shadow is peace. When the shadow no longer has to run, it no longer has to knock on our door. Through anxiety, jealousy, anger, self-sabotage, obsession, restlessness, the shadow no longer needs to scream once we begin listening. What follows is a deep peace, Not artificial peace, not performative calm, but the peace of wholeness. And when the shadow begins to be liberated, we recognize a major turning point in the Jungian journey. This is the process of individuation, the becoming of the whole person we were born to become. In the next part, we enter the core mechanism of Jung's psychology. Part 8, the mechanism Jung called individuation. Individuation is not self-improvement. It is not moral perfection. It is not becoming a better person. Individuation is the process of becoming the person we were born to be, beyond societal expectation, beyond persona, beyond inner fear. Jung defined individuation in 2 essays on analytical psychology. Individuation means becoming an individual, and insofar as individuality embraces our innermost last and incomparable uniqueness, it also implies becoming one's own self. Individuation is the journey of becoming oneself, not a moral replica of society. 1. The reunion of inner parts. Individuation does not eliminate the shadow. It integrates the shadow. It does not erase the persona. It makes the persona transparent, so it no longer blocks the soul. It does not destroy the ego. It places the ego in its proper role, a servant, not a dictator. Individuation happens when the conscious ego meets the part pushed into the unconscious shadow, meets the part buried within inner child, meets the deep inner wisdom self, meets the inner gendered archetype, anima, animus, meets all the other fragmented parts, and instead of conflict, they reunite, like piecing together fragments of the soul that were once torn apart. Jung said in Memories, dreams, reflections, only the man who can consciously ascend to the power of the inner voice becomes a personality, meaning a person only truly becomes a real being when they listen to the voice within, not the noise of society. 2. No longer fragmented, becoming whole. Before individuation, a person lives as if they are 2 people. A public self, strong, calm, moral, logical, pleasant, and then the hidden self, vulnerable, yearning, jealous, angry, uncertain, afraid, wanting to be loved. Society accepts only one of the 2, but individuation accepts both. In the practice of psychotherapy, Jung wrote, wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries. This is foundational. Wholeness does not come from eliminating weakness, but from harmonizing weakness with strength. Not from destroying fear, but from looking at fear with compassion. Not from defeating the shadow, but from opening the door for the shadow to step into the light. 3. Individuation is a return, not a climb. This journey does not require you to become someone else. It only requires you to remember who you are. Not adding to yourself, but removing what never belonged to you. removing the persona, removing imposed expectations, removing social conditioning, removing moral performance, removing collective identity, removing the fear of rejection, to return to the original self, in the undiscovered self. Jung said, the individual is the only real carrier of life, not society, not the collective, not ideology. Life is truly carried by the individual when that individual is authentic. 4. What does individuation do to the shadow? It does not ask, is the shadow bad? It asks, what lesson is the shadow holding? It does not ask, why do I have this emotion? It asks, what does this emotion need? It does not ask, why am I weak? It asks, what is this weakness protecting? The shadow is summoned back as part of the self, not scolded. It is re-invited into the inner ecosystem. 5. Becoming the unfragmented self. Imagine a person who no longer hides their vulnerability, no longer feels ashamed of wanting, no longer avoids pain, no longer pretends to be fine, no longer performs the perfect moral persona. They no longer need to please the world. They no longer need permission to exist. They simply are. Carl Jung offered a quiet but soul-shaking truth in the philosophical tree. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not who others want you to be, not the image society accepts, not the manufactured persona, but you as you are. And when individuation begins, when the parts of ourselves reunite, when the shadow is no longer treated as the enemy, when the being becomes whole, we experience a miraculous shift. We move from fighting ourselves to standing with ourselves. And that is the essence of the next part. Part 9. The turning point. Shifting from fighting myself to standing with myself. This is a transformation without fireworks. No dramatic music, no applause, no thunder in the heavens. But it is a quiet revolution in the soul. In the beginning, we don't notice it right away. We simply feel lighter. 1. A lightness, as if dropping decades of inner burden. Before, whenever we had a morally incorrect feeling, we attacked it. Do not be jealous. Do not be weak. Do not be disappointed. Do not stay sad too long. We patrolled our emotions like a guard at the gate of the inner city. But when we finally stand with ourselves, we can say, if I am hurting, I allow myself to hurt. If I am jealous, I will look at the part that feels scarce. If I am tired, I will allow myself to rest. This lightness comes from acceptance. Jung wrote in The Practice of Psychotherapy, the acceptance of oneself is the essence of the whole moral problem. When we start accepting ourselves, the inner war ceases. No more arrows fired across the battlefield. 2. The end of inner warfare. Before individuation. A person lives in constant inner opposition. Logic versus emotion. Ego versus fear. Persona versus shadow. Social norms versus instincts. Morality versus genuine need. These battles are more exhausting than any external stress. But when we stand with ourselves, there are no longer two sides. No more. One part, once one part, forbids. Jung wrote in Aion, "No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell." The meaning is profound. You cannot rise to the light if you reject your roots in darkness. You cannot be truly strong if you deny your vulnerability. You cannot know true peace if you deny your wounded parts. When we stop inner warfare, we allow all parts to coexist. We no longer say, "This part is good, this part is bad." We say all parts are me. 3. Stopping the moral performance for the world's approval. The shadow was cast into darkness, not because it was evil, but because society didn't permit its expression. So we wore the mask. We lived through the persona. I must be kind. I must be polite. I must be humble. I must be strong. I must be logical. I must be agreeable. We played the role of the pleasant version of ourselves. But Jung wrote in 2 essays on analytical psychology, "The persona is a complicated system of relations between individual consciousness and society. The persona is the mask for social adaptation. But if we identify with the mask, we lose ourselves. When we decide to no longer live to please others, we return to being real, not performative. The real human being has days of strength and days of weakness, moments of joy and moments of despair, times of compassion and times of anger, parts that are wise and parts that are foolish, parts that are mature and parts that are childlike. That is the real person," Jung said, "in the undiscovered self. The individual who is not anchored in his inner being is swept away by every wind. When we don't stand with ourselves, we are blown around by every expectation. But when we stand with ourselves, we grow roots. We are no longer carried away." The liberating shift from judgment to understanding. Before I am awful for having this feeling. Now I want to listen to the part that feels this way. Before, do not be jealous. Now, what desire is this jealousy revealing? Before I must be strong. Now I am allowed to be fragile. This is the shift from punishment to healing, a psyche without civil war. Before, we were like a nation divided inside itself. Now, we become a unified inner territory. No more inner shouting. Don't feel that. Don't say that. Don't think that. Now we hear quiet whispers. It's okay. I'm here with you. You are allowed to exist. This is true self-love. Not hyping yourself up, but simply no longer abandoning parts of your own being. And when this turning point arrives, when we stop fighting ourselves, when we stand with ourselves, when we stop performing morality for approval, we begin to realize something. The journey of inner integration is long-term, not a single moment of enlightenment. Which leads us directly to the next chapter, Part 10, Shadow. Integration and self-acceptance are not a moment, but a journey. Many people believe that one meditation session is enough, or one moment of enlightenment, or one sentence that touches the heart, or one emotional breakthrough is all it takes for the shadow to vanish, the soul to be at total peace, and life to flow smoothly. But Jung never taught that. Quite the opposite. Jung saw this journey as a lifelong process. He wrote in collected works, Volume 12, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain. Awakening does not come without discomfort. Integration does not come without patient acceptance. Inner peace does not arrive without time." 1. It is not one meditation. Meditation may help us access a temporary state of inner observation, but the shadow does not disappear merely because we saw it once. A person can meditate for an hour, but then return to daily life and still react in the same familiar ways, still jealous, still afraid of abandonment, still insecure, still self-judging. And that does not mean they failed. It only means shadow integration requires repetition. Just like building a psychological muscle, not through one lift, but through gradual reinforcement. 2. It is not one affirmation. Some people say to themselves, "I love myself. I am whole. I am enough." But if those words are only painted on the surface, they cannot reach the wounded layers beneath. There is a crucial Jungian truth. The shadow is not healed through positive slogans. It is healed through authenticity. Jung wrote in the Red Book, "The soul demands your truth, not your platitudes. The soul asks for your truth, not your rehearsed reassurance." 3. It is a lived practice. Shadow integration does not happen when your eyes are closed. It happens when they are open in everyday life. It unfolds in how you navigate an argument, a moment of emotional wounding, a flicker of jealousy, a burst of anger, a wave of insecurity, a situation that awakens an old memory. This is where the real training happens. Whenever you feel, "I'm overreacting, I'm getting defensive, I'm judging someone, I'm retreating inward," instead of blaming yourself, "There I go again. Why haven't I matured yet?" You can say, "This is an opportunity for integration." The journey is not linear. There will be days you feel peaceful, days you feel progress, days you feel, "I truly am healing." Then the next day, suddenly an old emotion rises fiercely. You feel like you're back at the beginning. You feel the shadow resurfacing. You feel the fear returning. And you may think, "I've failed. I'm back to square one." All the work was for nothing. But Jung would only smile. He understood the deeper truth of the psyche. He wrote in memories, dreams, reflections. I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. You are not defined by your past. You are defined by your patience in becoming. Inner peace arrives little by little. You won't notice it at first, but gradually, you judge yourself less. You feel less pressure to prove yourself. You fear being seen less. You stop resenting your own emotions. You stop fighting your feelings. You stop running from your memories. One day, quietly, you will notice you have become lighter naturally. Not because of effort, not because of discipline, but because you learned how to live truthfully with yourself. A gentle journey, not a war. Shadow integration is not a battle to defeat the inner darkness. It is the journey of befriending it. Self-acceptance is not about becoming a better person. It is the permission to be imperfect, to be vulnerable, to be sensitive, to make mistakes, to be fragile, to learn. It is the process of returning to being human, not a performance of expectation. A lifelong journey. Jung says clearly in The Stages of Life, life is a process of becoming, not arriving at a destination, but becoming day by day, breath by breath. You are not healed. You are healing. You are not complete. You are moving toward wholeness. And as you walk this path long enough, as you befriend your emotions, as you dissolve self-judgment, as you stand by your own side, you begin to realize something profound: to live as your true self. You must dare to live before yourself, before you ever live before the world. And that leads us naturally to the next part, part 11. Living truthfully with yourself before living with the world. If in the past we lived like actors in the theater of society, busy performing an acceptable version of ourselves, then now we begin learning to show up as who we truly are. No more editing, no more covering, no more hiding the unpleasant part, no more concealing complex emotions. 1. No longer needing to impress. Those who have not yet accepted themselves live with an anxious inner dialogue. What do people think of me? Do they respect me? Am I good enough? Am I lovable enough? Am I successful enough? We use our life energy to build an image instead of building ourselves. Jung wrote in memories, dreams, reflections. The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents. But for adults, one of the greatest burdens we place upon ourselves is living a life that is not authentic, a life shaped by the expectations of others. When we live truthfully with ourselves, the central question shifts from, what do they think, to, how do I feel? And when that happens, the atmosphere inside becomes spacious. No more exhausting efforts to impress. No more consuming energy to please. No more living under external gazes. You may even realize The need to impress is the unconscious hunger for acceptance. But our heart has now found a deeper source of acceptance from within ourselves. 2. No longer needing to fake positivity. Before we wore a smile while our heart was breaking. We said I'm fine when we were not fine. We played the strong one when we needed comfort. We believed that making every feeling positive was maturity. But that was merely emotional avoidance disguised as optimism. Jung says in Psychological Types, one does not overcome an emotion by fleeing from it, but by living through it. You do not transcend an emotion by avoiding it, but by walking through it. The authentic person no longer forces themselves to be cheerful, no longer feels shame over sadness, no longer interprets tiredness or loneliness as personal failure. They can say, I'm not okay today. I'm hurting. I need space. I need time. I need to lean on someone. That is courage. That is clarity. That is truth. A true smile can only arise when true sorrow is allowed to exist. 3. No longer hiding emotional truth. One of the deepest marks of inner maturity is the end of moral policing towards oneself. No more censoring every emotion. No more labeling feelings as right or wrong. A feeling is simply a feeling, not a sin, not a failure, not a moral stain, not a weakness. It is a message from the unconscious, a whisper from the soul, a signal from the core of our being. Jung wrote in the Red Book, observe your emotions without judging them, and they will reveal their meaning. When we no longer hide our emotions become teachers. They become guidance. They become light within the darkness. When we live truthfully with ourselves, we no longer have to pretend to like what we do not like, pretend to be fine when we are not fine, pretend to be strong when we are tired, pretend to be unaffected when we are hurt, pretend not to care when we deeply care. Instead, we are allowed to live faithfully with our inner experience. Living authentically is returning to original wholeness. Have you ever watched a child? When it's sad, it cries. When it's joyful, it laughs. When it's angry, it expresses. When it's scared, it seeks comfort. When it needs love, it reaches out. No guilt, no shame, no pretending to be strong, no suppression. That is the original wholeness of being human. Individuation is not becoming the best version. It is returning to the original version, living truthfully as an act of liberation. When you live honestly with yourself, you suddenly stop fearing silence. You stop fearing the eyes of others. You stop fearing misunderstanding. You stop fearing judgment. You realize the world does not demand your perfection. It simply hopes for your truth. Carl Jung spoke a sentence that is not philosophy, but lived truth. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. The greatest privilege of life is not success, not admiration, not approval. It is being yourself. And when we live truthfully, no longer masked, no longer artificially positive, no longer suppressing emotion. A quiet miracle occurs. We begin to feel a deep inner stillness. We start to hear the voice of the self, the center of the psyche rising. That leads us to part 12, crystallization. The self emerging. Carl Jung did not view the self as a new mask, not as another persona, not as a higher intellect. The self is the center of the entire psychological system, the source of existence. In Aion, Jung wrote, "The self is not only the center, but also the whole circumference which embraces both conscious and unconscious. The self is not merely the center. The self is the circle that embraces both consciousness and unconsciousness. The self is not just all of you. The self is the one who sees all of you. One, the self is the center of the psyche. If the ego is the part of us that acts in life, trying to survive, trying to establish identity, trying to control, trying to adapt, then the self is the part that knows you are already enough. The self does not require you to impress, maintain appearances, preserve dignity, appear intelligent, appear strong, appear fine. The self only asks you to be real. When the self emerges, the voice in the mind shifts from judgment to guidance. It is no longer, don't think that, don't feel that, don't reveal that. But this is your feeling. You can witness it. You don't need to resist it. 2. Inner stability emerges. Before the self awakens, the mind is like a lake continuously disturbed by wind, calm today, anxious tomorrow, elated when praised, crushed when criticized, validated when someone cares, meaningless when someone leaves. The ego is shaken by external forces. The self is not. The self is the depth of the ocean. The surface may have waves, but underneath there is always stillness. In memories, dreams, reflections. Jung wrote, "At times I feel that I am spread out over the landscape and inside things, and am myself living in every tree, in the splashing of the waves, in the clouds and in the animals that come and go." This is the description of a consciousness that is stable, no longer living as a separate self, but as part of life itself. Inner stability is not absence of emotion. It is emotion no longer controls you. 3. Stillness replaces internal conflict. Once, we lived in internal civil war. One part wanted expression. One part wanted hiding. One part wanted love. One part feared hurt. One part wanted to move forward. One part clung to the past. The self emerges, and the battlefield falls silent. Not because one side has conquered, but because the division has dissolved. We no longer ask, "Who should I be?" but "What am I in this moment?" We no longer ask, "Which mask should I wear today?" but "Can I show up as my real self?" Carl Jung said in the Red Book, "When you are in harmony with yourself, you enjoy the same happiness that the world achieves." Harmony with oneself is harmony with the entire world. The self does not try to prove the self simply exists. The ego wants to be seen. The self does not require that. The ego wants recognition. The self is not dependent on it. The ego wants control. The self observes. The ego reacts. The self witnesses. The ego fears. The self trusts. The self is a return. You do not become the self. You return to the self. It has always been there beneath the layers of persona, ego, shadow, wounds, defenses, fear of rejection, longing to be loved, shame, denial. The self never disappears. It only becomes obscured. Healing is not constructing something new, but removing the layers that are not you. When the self emerges, life changes. You no longer fear silence. You no longer require someone to fill you. You no longer fall apart under someone's gaze. You no longer live by reaction. You no longer feel internally insufficient. Not because you possess everything, but because you finally feel there is nothing missing inside. The moment of crystallization. This is not a sudden explosion. This is the moment when you take a long, deep breath and realize you are no longer an enemy to yourself. You no longer fight your own being. You no longer fear your own interior. A quiet peace arrives without announcement, without display. And you understand, this is the self-present, wordless, yet undeniable. And this is the crystallization of the entire Jungian journey. Seeing the shadow, accepting the shadow, integrating the shadow, living authentically. And at last, the self emerges as the steady foundation of the soul. Tonight, you have not fought yourself. You've embraced yourself. You have not rejected the dark. You have allowed it to return home. You have not tried to become someone. You have simply allowed yourself to be. Carl Jung said, "I'd rather be whole than good. I would rather be whole than merely good." If this journey touched you, lightened your heart, or gently carried you into sleep, please subscribe and continue this path with us. And now, let sleep wrap around you in the quiet peace of a soul becoming whole. Good night.